The Vilari Empire had never lost a war. In their 400 years of expansion across the stars, they had conquered 41 worlds. They had broken races that possessed cosmic technologies older than human civilization. They had crushed civilizations that outnumbered them 20 to 1. They had descended upon worlds filled with screaming, fighting, desperate races, and every time, they left those worlds as masters. They were not cruel in this. Supreme Commander Rael took pride in this, the way old soldiers guard their medals. Cruelty was inefficient. The Vilari conquered through mathematics. They measured the target, applied the precise amount of force, and waited for the race to break. Every race broke. It was never a question of if, it was only a question of when. Rael sat in his chair aboard the flagship Hand of Dominion, reviewing the dossier on the small blue-green world in the middle of a quiet solar system on the edge of this galactic arm. Earth. The dossier was thin. It told him everything he needed to know. Humans, as they called themselves, were a young race. Their written history spanned 10,000 years, and most of that history was a chaotic, bloody mess of minor wars between small tribes that grew into larger wars between larger nations. They had mastered basic space travel only 70 years ago. They had no faster-than-light technology, no energy weapons, no shields, no long-range sensors capable of detecting the Vilari fleet at any meaningful distance. Their military forces were divided among nearly 200 separate governing bodies that regularly disagreed with each other, rivaled one another, and occasionally tried to destroy one another. Divided. Primitive. Brand new. Rael closed the dossier. Fleet Commander Dorat, he said. Fleet Commander Dorat stepped forward from the back of the command deck. By Vilari standards, he was young, only 160 years old, but he had commanded 12 planetary conquest campaigns and had won them all. He was precise, efficient, and hungry, which made him useful. He stood with his hands behind his back, waiting, for he knew Rael did not like to be interrupted until he had finished thinking. "You have studied the target?" Rael asked. "Yes, sir." "Your assessment?" Dorat did not hesitate. Low-level conquest. The race has no unified command structure, no single authority controlling all military forces. There are several major military alliances in the Northern Hemisphere, but they are historically competitive and will not coordinate smoothly under pressure. Their weapons technology is roughly equivalent to the Sarats during our third expansion period. Nuclear potential, but no energy weapons, no orbital defense platforms capable of engaging our ships, no interstellar interdictor. Their orbital assets are minimal. A crude research station, a network of communication and GPS satellites, and some very old observation equipment. He paused for exactly 1 second. "I estimate total planetary submission within 30 days, 60 at the most. Resources are excellent, abundant fresh water, vast mineral deposits on several continents, a breathable atmosphere that requires no modification for Vilari habitation. The agricultural potential alone makes the planet worth taking. High Command is correct to have prioritized it." Rael nodded slowly. "How many ships?" "I would take 300 to be thorough. We lose nothing by taking 200. Rael's voice was level, not angry, just final. "I need the remaining 100 on the border with the carrot. The situation there. If 200 ships cannot handle a Doftel civilization, then the problem is not the number of ships." Dorat accepted this without expression. "Understood, sir. One more question." Rael turned back to the wide viewport, beyond which lay the dark field of stars. In the far system of this solar system, there are marker beacons. Old. Our advanced scouts found them near the large outer gas giant, the one they called Jupiter. The signals are ancient, at least several thousand years old. They do not match any known technology of allied or catalogued races. Dorat frowned. Marker beacons placed in a pattern around the inner system, specifically around the habitable planet. Rael's voice did not change. "I want to know who placed them and why. After you secure the planet, conduct an investigation and report. Of course, it is likely old navigational warning markers. We found similar ones near the third Sarada. They were placed by an early spacefaring race mapping the system." "Likely," Rael agreed. Dorat left. Rael stood at the viewport for a long time after the door closed. He pulled the beacon data onto his personal display and studied the pattern of their arrangement again. The beacons formed a rough sphere around the habitable zone of the solar system. Not around a hazard, not around a radiation field or an unstable region, specifically around the planet. He thought about it. Then he closed the display and left it. Dorat would investigate later. In the history of the Empire, There had been 41 conquered worlds, and not one had presented a true surprise. The 42nd would be no different. Fleet Commander Dorat's 200 ships exited hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system on a cold Tuesday of the human month of October. The humans did not know it. Their deepest space equipment could not detect the fleet at that distance under any circumstances. Their furthest space probes were old and slow, pushing through the outer darkness at speeds that would be shameful for a first-year student pilot. They had ground-based telescopes of impressive size, but the Vilari used passive suppression fields as standard operating procedure on all approach vectors to any human instrument at any human observatory looking in the right direction. The fleet simply did not exist. 200 warships hung in the darkness past Neptune, and 8 billion people on the blue planet had no idea. Dorat sat in his command chair on the bridge of the unwavering path and watched his crew conduct pre-campaign checks with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. All of them had. This crew had served with Dorat in 4 campaigns. They were calm, spoke in quiet voices, and moved without haste. There was no special tension on the bridge because there was no special reason for tension. It was a job. They were good at it. Passive scanning, full spectrum, Dorat said. I need a complete picture before we move. The scan took just over 4 hours. His science officer, Officer Virat, was a methodical woman who disliked drama and organized her reports in descending order of tactical relevance, which Dorat had always appreciated. She stood next to him and dispassionately walked him through the data. Population approximately 8 billion, concentrated in major urban centers on 6 of the 7 major land masses of the planet. Significant population in every climate zone, including some environments. Virat considered frankly hostile, extreme cold, extreme heat, high altitude, deep desert. She noted this as a minor curiosity and moved on. Military organization is divided, as stated in the dossier. The most powerful armed forces are concentrated in the Northern Hemisphere. Several major alliances have existed for decades. These alliances have treaties, shared infrastructure, and communication networks. They also have historical friction with one another that led to major conflicts in the last century. 2 of the largest powers have had nuclear weapons aimed at each other for most of the last 70 years. The nuclear arsenal is large enough in aggregate power to sterilize all complex life on the planet several times over. Delivery systems include land-based ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and bombs delivered by aircraft. Range, accuracy, and payload data were logged. Orbital assets are minimal. 1 crewed orbital station, approximately 400 satellites of various purposes, communication, navigation, weather observation, military intelligence. Some military satellites carry crewed directed energy cannons, laser systems designed to blind or disable other satellites. None are capable of attacking a Vilari ship. No FTL, no energy shields, no active sensor grid capable of detecting the fleet in its current position. They have no idea we are here, Virat said, looking up from her display. No, Dorat agreed. They do not. He thought about the standard protocol for conquest. Approach to orbit. Broadcast a demand for surrender in the main languages of the target race. Give 12 hours for a response. If the response is not unconditional surrender, begin selective bombardment of military infrastructure to demonstrate the gap between the target race's capabilities and their ability to resist, then wait another 12 hours. Most races did not live to see the second demonstration. The logic of the situation became undeniable. Once the first cities went dark, it was a clean process. Dorat had always considered it a form of mercy. Better a quick demonstration than a protracted resistance that cost lives on both sides. Begin approach, he said. Standard entry trajectory. No active emissions until we are within the inner system. The fleet moved. 3 days later, they were seen by a man named Dr. Yusef Akafer. He worked the night shift at an observatory on a mountain peak in the Chilean Andes, and he was not looking for alien spaceships. He was tracking a comet he had discovered 14 months ago and intended to follow it until it rounded Jupiter and vanished into the darkness for the next few thousand years. It was a small, dim, and unremarkable comet. But it was his-like things you discover. You feel they are yours. And he watched it with the quiet pleasure of a man tending to something he held dear. The fleet crossed the edge of his telescope's field of view. While he was adjusting tracking parameters, he nearly missed it. The suppression field significantly reduced the visual signature of the fleet, but not entirely, not at close range. and 200 ships moving in tight formation in the inner system at a speed nothing natural should move at left, a blurred smudge on the edge of the frame that shouldn't have been there. He stopped adjusting. He looked at the blur, increased the magnification. 200 objects, roughly spherical in shape, with structural features that were clearly not natural, moving in a precise, uniform formation on a trajectory leading without any ambiguity directly to Earth. Yusef Akafar sat quietly for about 4 seconds. Then he picked up the phone. Information moved the way. Catastrophic information always moves. Slowly, then suddenly, then everywhere at once. Yusef called his department head. The department head called the observatory director. The director called the National Space Agency. The space agency called 4 other space agencies within the hour. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth had received a briefing. Within 12 hours, it was on every news network in the world. Within 15 hours, the information leaked to social media, and no official statement could contain it. 200 alien ships were approaching Earth. By the time Dorat's fleet reached lunar orbit and took positions, every person on the planet with access to a screen knew what was happening. Electromagnetic activity from the planet's surface rose sharply on Dorat's passive sensors. A wall of radio signals, most of it noise, fear, information moving at the speed of a race, that had realized it was not alone and was not safe. Dorat observed this and nodded to himself. Good. They know. A race that knows what is coming makes better decisions. Fear concentrates the mind. When the governing bodies run the calculations, 200 warships against their own capabilities, rational voices will prevail over pride. The request for surrender will come before the 1-2 hour deadline. It almost always does. He gave the order to broadcast. The Vilari translation systems were built based on decades of captured human radio and television transmissions. Humans had been broadcasting their languages, their music, their arguments, their history, and their entertainment into space since the beginning of the 20th century. What Dorat's analysts called either an exceptional gift or an exceptional oversight, depending on who you asked. They had built a working translation matrix for 42 human languages and verified it against military communications captured over the last week. The message was simple. It was simple for every conquest campaign Dorat had ever conducted. It read, "People of Earth, your world has been selected for inclusion in the Vilari Empire. Resistance is not recommended. The military potential of your race is insufficient to withstand us. Surrender your military forces and governing structures within 12 hours of this broadcast, and the transition will be carried out peacefully. Your people will be recognized as subjects of the Empire with all the protections and duties that status carries. Refusal to comply will result in military action against your infrastructure. You have 12 hours to respond." It was broadcast on all human radio frequencies simultaneously in 42 languages by repeating transmitters on all 200 ships. Dorat leaned back in his chair and waited. 3 hours passed. 6, 9. His communications officer turned from her console. Her facial expression was professionally neutral, but something about the angle of her head was slightly off. "Commander, we have a response. Put it on the screen." The response was broadcast from hundreds of separate transmitters across the planet's surface, simultaneously in all the human languages the translation matrix had cataloged, and some it had not yet fully processed. It compiled the signals and output a single text on the main display. Dorat read it. He read it 3 times. 3 words. "Come and try." He sat with those 3 words in a silence that stretched into a long, strange moment. To his left, his first officer made a quiet sound that Dorat chose not to identify. On the display, the 3 words sat completely motionless and did not elaborate, did not apologize, did not ask for anything, did not threaten in specific terms. Just 3 words: level, direct, almost bored. Come and try. Dorat had collected 12 surrender responses. In 12 campaigns, he had received desperate pleas from races that knew they could not fight. He had received defiant statements from races that mistakenly believed they could. Once, he had received silence from a race so fractured by internal conflict that no one could agree on a response. He had never received this. 3 words that did not bother to explain. 3 words that sounded less like a declaration of war and more like a who, opening the door. He thought for a moment about the marker beacons in the outer system. He pushed the thought away. Begin the bombardment sequence. Only military targets, major military targets of the northern continent. We will give them a demonstration and wait for the second response. His crew moved to their stations. Beyond the viewport, the blue planet rotated slowly in the darkness. Below, something was already moving for which Dorat had no data, no category, and no warning. He did not know it yet. He would learn. The first strike was surgical. Dorat had intentionally ordered it so. The goal was not destruction. The goal was a demonstration. He wanted the humans to see the gap between what they had and what they were facing. And he wanted them to see it clearly, without confusion, so the rational ones among them would immediately understand the calculation. His ships targeted military airfields, radar installations, command centers, and naval ports. They did not target cities. They did not target civilian infrastructure. The weapons they used were precision kinetic impactors and low-power energy pulses designed to destroy specific structures without devastating the surrounding area. The entire strike took 11 minutes. When it ended, Dorat reviewed the results. 42 military sites on 3 continents were hit. All 42 were confirmed, destroyed. Collateral damage was minimal. The message was clear. The Vilari could reach any point on the planet's surface from orbit at any time with an accuracy humans could not match. Using weapons humans could not stop. He broadcast the second message. This is a demonstration of our capabilities. Your military infrastructure can be destroyed from orbit. Further resistance will result in an attack on populated areas. We ask you again to surrender. You have 12 hours. He leaned back in his chair and waited for the second response. It arrived in 4 hours, not from one government, but from all of them. It was output on his display, compiled from hundreds of simultaneous transmissions. We are still here. Come down and fight us for real. Dorat stared at the screen. His first officer, Commander Seville, appeared at his shoulder. Seville was calm, experienced, and not easily surprised. He looked at the display with an expression Dorat had not seen on his face across 4 campaigns together. Something that was not quite anxiety, but stood right next to it. That is an irrational response, Seville said quietly. No, Dorat agreed. Irrational. He thought for a moment, then made a decision he believed was correct, and which he would later admit in the privacy of his thoughts was a mistake. Deploy troops, he said. 3 sites, 2 in the northern hemisphere, 1 in the southern. Urban centers. I want them to see soldiers, not just fire from orbit. Physical presence is what makes conquest real for most races. They need to feel it to believe it. Seville said nothing. He was not one to argue before the crew. Prepare the landing parties, Dorat said. 12,000 soldiers per site. Full gear and equipment. Deploying at dawn, local time. Vilari landing craft descended into 3 cities simultaneously. A major city on the east coast of North America, a large city in Central Europe, and a metropolis in East Asia. They landed on open spaces, parks, airfields, large public squares. Dorat had read enough human history to know that landing in the middle of a built-up urban area was tactically dirty and unnecessary. Better to land on the outskirts and push inward cleaner, more organized. The humans would see the scale of the force, and logic would do its work. Vilari soldiers who emerged from the landing craft were large, significantly taller than humans, encased in multi-layered composite armor capable of stopping anything from a human's ordinary arsenal, carrying energy weapons that were simply on another level from anything the humans possessed. They moved in dense professional formations. Squads covered squads, advancing through the streets with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had conducted urban operations on a dozen different worlds. The first 30 minutes went exactly by Dorat's model. Human civilians fled, streets emptied before the advancing formations. There was scattered gunfire from small arms from several positions, which the Vilari armor withstood without losses, and those positions were quickly neutralized. Local military forces in the initial landing zones had been cut down by orbital strikes and were caught off guard by the speed and direction of the advance. For 30 minutes, everything went by the forecast. Then, it stopped going by the forecast. The first thing that changed was that human civilians stopped running. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces in different places, and the pattern took time to become clear. A group of people who were running would stop, look at each other, look at the soldiers, look at the streets around them, and then, instead of continuing to run, they would head to a specific place down. Into buildings, into basements and cellars, into underground parking lots, into the city infrastructure, into the spaces beneath the streets where the efficiency of the Vilari sensor equipment decreased due to the density of the material above. The second thing that changed was the resistance. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A squad advancing down a broad commercial street came under fire from 3 separate upper-floor positions simultaneously. By the time they identified and neutralized all 3 positions, a 4th opened fire from a direction they had already cleared. The shooters were not soldiers in uniform, or not entirely. Some were, some weren't. Some were men and women in ordinary civilian clothing, carrying military weapons and fighting from positions that military planning would never have assigned. The third thing that changed was the terrain. Every building became a problem. Every intersection could be under control. The Vilari had excellent sensor equipment, but cities were dense and deep and full of signal-scattering materials. And the humans seemed to intuitively understand this, moving through the urban space so they remained in the sensor shadows. A squad that entered a large department store to clear it exited the other side without its lead detachment. 3 soldiers simply vanished somewhere inside, and no one heard a discharge of energy weapons. What killed them and how was unclear from the remote data. Dorat received the first field reports 3 hours into the ground operation and felt the first true anxiety of the campaign. Not a catastrophe, not yet, but wrong. The shape of it was wrong. He pulled up the casualty report. 11 Vilari soldiers dead, 43 wounded at 3 sites against a race without energy weapons and without information on armor specifications. 11 dead in 3 hours of what should have been a demonstration exercise. He called his ground commanders for a direct report. Commander Tez, leading the North American site, was a veteran of 6 campaigns. He was calm on the line. But something in his manner was deliberate when Dorat recognized the careful voice of a man choosing his words. They fight differently than anything in the database. We expected organized resistance from military formations or a panicked flight of civilians. We got neither. They are dispersed. They freely mix civilian and military personnel and use the city itself as a weapon. Every building is a defensive position. Every underground system is a supply and movement route. They don't try to stop our advance in the open. They pull us into close-quarters combat where our range advantage is negated. They are led by a central command. A pause. I cannot confirm a centralized command. Individual units communicate and coordinate, but I cannot find a single structure. It is possible each local group makes independent decisions that look like coordination because they have similar training. Similar training, Dorat repeated. These are not all professional soldiers. No, Commander. Many are civilians with weapons, but they fight like soldiers. Dorat ended the call and sat with this information. The European site reported similarly. The Asian site reported that 3 blocks near the landing zone had been completely retaken by human forces, using a combination of underground movement, rooftop sniping, and what the site commander described as improvised explosive devices of significant power placed directly in the road surface. Vilari armor could withstand direct small arms fire, but a large explosion right under a soldier was a different category of problem. They mined the roads not with sophisticated military equipment, but with homemade devices built from whatever was at hand, placed based on a clear understanding of where the Vilari would have to go. Dorat thought about this for a long time. He had a very complete tactical picture of how the operation was going. He did not yet have a conceptual picture of what he was dealing with. He requested a full intelligence review. He wanted everything that was available about human military history. What his analysts brought back over the next 8 hours did not inspire optimism. Humans had been fighting each other for 10,000 years, not metaphorically, literally, continuously, in documented and undocumented form, on every continent of the planet, in every possible type of terrain, in all possible climate conditions, at all possible scales, from individual combat to clashes involving millions of soldiers over thousands of kilometers. They had fought in jungles, deserts, mountains, frozen tundra, open oceans, and underground tunnels. They had developed strategies and tactics for every conceivable environment. They had written entire libraries on the theory of war, centuries of accumulated reflection on how to fight, when to fight, where to fight, and, most importantly, how to fight when outnumbered. This last category was vast. Humans had a specific, well-developed military tradition of fighting enemies who outmatched them in technology, numbers, or position. They called it different things in different languages: guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare, insurgency. The basic idea was always the same. When you cannot match the enemy in open combat, you change the terms of the fight. You draw the enemy into territory that neutralizes his advantage. You refuse to stand still long enough to be destroyed. You make every step the enemy takes costly. You accept casualties, and you do not stop. Dorat read this and felt something cold moving through his chest. 11 dead, improvised explosive devices on the road. Civilians fighting side by side with soldiers without clear differentiation. Who is who? Moving in sensor shadows through underground infrastructure. The way the resistance became stronger as the hours passed, not weaker. This was not an accident. This was not panic. This was a race that had practiced this particular type of war for thousands of years, doing it automatically without orders, because it was in the bones of their military culture. He sent an urgent message to Supreme Commander Rail. Sir, the ground operation is ongoing but with complications not foreseen by our initial intelligence assessment. Human resistance is not weakening as expected. They are employing tactics of dispersed urban combat with a high degree of effectiveness. Casualty numbers remain within acceptable limits but have a tendency to rise. I request further instructions on the rules of engagement regarding civilian combatants, as the distinction between civilian and military personnel appears practically non-existent in the human response. I also request a review of our intelligence base for this operation. He sent it and waited. Then he returned to the casualty reports. Now 37 dead. The number had increased while he was writing the message. He thought of the 3 words they had sent in response. Come and try. At the time, he had read that as a challenge. The kind of bravado that scared races sometimes use to hide their fear. Now, he was rethinking that reading. He did not think they were scared. He thought they were telling him something specific in the most level, most direct words possible. Come and try. Not, we will fight you. Not, you cannot defeat us. Not, we are not afraid. Come and try. Come here specifically and try this specifically, and see what happens. En invitation. Dorat looked out the viewport at the blue and white planet slowly rotating below, and for the first time in 12 campaigns, he felt something for which he had no name. It was not fear. He told himself that firmly. It was just a situation that required recalibration. He began the recalibration. Below him, in 3 cities on 3 continents, 12,000 of his soldiers were learning something that was not in any pre-campaign briefing. That thin intelligence dossier could not contain it, that which could only be learned the way the Vilari soldiers were learning it right now. The hard way, in the darkness of a city that had decided, without a meeting, without a vote, without a coordinated announcement, to become a weapon. On the 4th day, Dorat stopped sleeping. It was an unconscious decision. He simply stopped leaving the command deck. His crew brought him food, which he ate without tasting. He drank the equivalent of strong Vilari coffee in quantities his doctor would have objected to. He watched the incoming data from the 3 combat zones on the planet below and tried to find the point where the numbers should have started going the other way. They did not go the other way. 119 Vilari soldiers dead, 241 wounded, 63 of whom had injuries serious enough to require evacuation from the combat zone. His ground forces held their bridgeheads and the immediate surrounding territory, but any attempt to push deeper into the urban centers caused significant casualties and yielded minimal success. The humans slowly yielded every block, and they made the Vilari pay for every block. And then, at night, they returned. Night turned out to be a special problem. Vilari soldiers had good optical equipment for low light, better than anything humans technically had. But humans had something that sensors could not fully account for. They knew their city in complete darkness. They had grown up on these streets. They knew every alleyway, every basement connection, every entrance and exit of every building. The city was a body they inhabited, and in the darkness, they moved through it like blood through veins, quietly, purposefully, and everywhere. On the morning of the 4th day, a patrol of 8 Vilari soldiers at the North American site entered a block they had cleared the previous evening and simply did not return. No transmissions, no weapons fire detected, no distress signal. 8 soldiers in full armor with active communications vanished in a block of buildings that had been confirmed cleared 12 hours ago. When Dorat sent a rescue team, they found the soldiers. They were incapacitated, how? Medical forensics were still investigating and moved 4 blocks from where they had disappeared. They were alive, stripped of their weapons. Stripped of their weapons. Dorat read the last part twice. Then he put the report down and stood very quietly for 30 seconds, something his crew had never seen before. They were taking the weapons. They were studying them in real time under combat conditions. They were capturing Vilari technology and taking it apart to understand it. He called an emergency briefing of all his senior officers. The briefing room was quiet. quiet as rooms become when everyone present has read the same information and come to the same uncertain conclusion, but is waiting to see who will say it first. Dorat said it first. It was his job. "We have a problem," he said. "Not a tactical problem, but a conceptual one. We came into this campaign with a model of what this race is, and the model is wrong. I need to understand why it is wrong so we can adjust our approach." He displayed the human casualty estimates on the main screen of the room. The numbers were in the hundreds of thousands. Orbital strikes were accurate but not bloodless, and ground fighting in 3 major urban centers had continued for 4 days. The scale of human losses was massive by any measure. "They are suffering significantly more losses than we are," he said. "Their military losses are high. Their civilian losses, since the distinction is becoming increasingly conditional, are substantial, and they are not stopping." The room waited. "I want to understand this. The tactical mechanics of how they fight. I already understand that enough to be concerned. I want to understand the psychological and cultural foundations of their behavior. Why does a race that cannot win this fight still continue it?" He looked at his intelligence chief. "Rikat, you have had 4 days. What have you found?" Intelligence Chief Rikat was old, dry, and precise. One of those who delivered bad news without apologizing for it. He stood and displayed his compiled report. "I have been reviewing the full historical database," he said. "Everything we captured from their broadcasts and communication networks over the last few decades, military history, cultural records, political history. First, I will give you the short version, then the details." Rikat looked around the room. "This race has been continuously at war with itself for 10,000 years, not sporadically continuously. Throughout the entire documented period, there has not been 1 year when an organized armed conflict was not happening somewhere on the planet." The room absorbed this. "Moreover," Rikat continued, "they fought in every possible type of terrain on the planet. Arctic conditions, tropical jungles, open desert, high-altitude regions, urban centers of immense complexity, underground, underwater, and in the last 70 years, in the near-orbital environment. They developed specialized tactical doctrines for each of these environments, armies specially trained for Arctic warfare, specifically for jungle warfare, specifically for desert warfare, specifically for urban combat. It would not be an exaggeration to say that waging war is one of the things this race is most experienced at in their entire history." "How experienced?" Dorat asked. Rikat displayed a number. Their documented major military conflicts, which they define as conflicts with more than 10,000 deaths, number in the hundreds. Their undocumented minor conflicts, thousands. They fought with spears, swords, fire, gunpowder, poison gas, airplanes, armored vehicles, submarines, ballistic missiles, and nuclear weapons. They developed nuclear weapons, then used them in actual combat twice. And then they did not use them against each other for 80 years, despite possessing them in huge quantities, because they understood the consequences. The last part sounded different than the rest. "They exercised restraint," Dorat said slowly. "A race that possesses enough weapons to destroy itself exercised restraint for 80 years. Not because they lacked the capabilities, not because they lacked the will to use them against each other, they were very close several times, but because they performed the calculation, understood the result, and decided not to do it." Rikat paused. "This is not a race incapable of self-control. This is a race that directs its aggression with considerable precision when it wants to." The room was very quiet. "There is more," Rikat said. His tone did not change, but something on his face shifted. "In the last 4 days since the ground invasion began, I have been tracking their communication networks. Their global political situation before our arrival was fragmented. Several major powers in open diplomatic conflict, historical enemies, countries that had been in a state of military tension with each other for decades. "I know about that," Dorat said. "That was part of the reason we expected the conquest to be straightforward." "Yes," Rikat displayed an intercepted communication. "This is a transmission from 4 days ago, the day of our ground forces landing. This is a conversation between a senior military commander in a country called Russia and his counterpart in a country called the United States of America. These 2 countries have had nuclear weapons aimed at each other for 70 years. They have waged proxy wars against each other on several continents. They were, in the opinion of several human historians whose work I have read, closer to mutual annihilation than any 2 other entities in their recorded history." He let that settle for a moment. In this conversation, the Russian commander calls the American admiral by name. They spend 4 minutes coordinating data on troop movements, and then another 6 minutes discussing the most effective way to distribute human ammunition across the 3 combat zones. Rykat looked up. Then the Russian says, and I quote the translation, "Whatever happens, brother, we will deal with this first." The American responds, "Agreed." And they go back to tactical coordination. The room listened. Dorat thought about what this meant. Countries that were each other's most dangerous enemies, that had spent 70 years on the brink of mutual annihilation, discarded that conflict instantly without negotiations, without a peace treaty, without anything but a common threat and 4 days of time. "How many similar coalitions have formed?" he asked. "All of them," Rikat said simply. "Every major military power on the planet is now sharing tactical data and coordinating responses. Countries that were in active armed conflict with each other just 3 years ago are cooperating. Countries that for decades had no diplomatic contact are on the same communication channels." He closed his display. "They are uniting not under a single government yet, but operationally on the battlefield at the command level, they are functioning as a single military force. It took them 4 days. Dorat stood from his chair and walked to the viewport. Below, clouds slowly moved over the blue planet. From here, it looked peaceful. From here, it looked like what the dossier said. It was a small, young, divided world with limited technology and immense internal tensions. The dossier was not exactly wrong. It just didn't understand what any of this meant in practice. Divided did not mean eternally divided. Limited technology did not mean limited capability. Young did not mean inexperienced in what mattered. He sent a message to Supreme Commander Rail that had been forming in his mind for the last 2 days. "Sir, the ground operation is continuing, but with complications not foreseen by our initial intelligence assessment. I believe we are facing a race to which our standard model of conquest is inapplicable. They do not break under pressure, they consolidate. Historically, enemy nations are forming operational coalitions within days of the invasion. Their military culture includes an extensive doctrine for exactly such a scenario, fighting a technologically superior invader using urban and asymmetric methods. I am not sure the ground campaign will lead to surrender. I request permission to reinforce orbital strikes and urge an urgent review of the intelligence base for this campaign. There is something in this race that is not in the file." He sent it and waited. Then he looked at the casualty reports. Now 37 dead. The number had increased while he was writing the message. He thought of the 3 words they had sent in response. "Come and try." At the time, he had read it as a challenge, bravado. He was rethinking that reading now. He didn't think they were scared. He thought they were telling him something specific in the most level, most direct terms possible. "Come and try." Not, "We will fight you." Not, "You cannot defeat us." Not, "We are not afraid." Come and try. Come here specifically and try this specifically, and see what happens. An invitation. Dorat looked out the viewport at the blue and white planet slowly rotating below, and for the first time in 12 campaigns, he felt something for which he had no name. It was not fear. He firmly told himself this. It was just that the situation required recalibration. He began the recalibration. Below him, in 100 underground facilities and converted production workshops and university research departments, 8 billion people who had been fighting each other for 10,000 years had just found something they could agree on. He still had no idea what would come of this. He was going to find out. The first rocket came from a silo in the middle of nowhere. Dorat's sensor crew detected the launch 40 seconds before liftoff. Standard Vilari orbital sensor packages could easily detect the launch of a large ballistic missile from the planet's surface. This was essentially one of those details that made the initial intelligence assessment so comforting. Yes, humans had nuclear weapons. Yes, they had ballistic missiles, but missiles were designed to fly in a shallow arc from one point on the surface to another. Their trajectory carried them through the upper atmosphere and back down. They could not reach a Vilari ship in stable high orbit. Everything on the bridge knew this. It was in the briefing materials. It had been tested many times. Therefore, when the sensor operator reported a launch, there was a moment, just a moment of professional routine before she looked at the trajectory data again, and her voice changed. "Commander, this is not a Earth-to-Earth trajectory." Dorat was at her console in 4 steps. He looked at the data himself. The rocket was rising, not arcing. Its second stage was burning differently than any human ballistic missile in the Vilari database, longer, more powerful, maintaining thrust far beyond the point where a standard ICBM would have cut its engines and begun its downward arc. "It is targeted at us," said the sensor operator in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm. "Intercept, intercept," Dorat said. Vilari point defense systems were fast. They were designed to handle exactly this threat, and they handled it. The incoming rocket was destroyed at a distance of approximately 40 kilometers from the unwavering path, producing a bright flash visible from the planet's surface. Then came the second alert, and the third. 14 simultaneous launches from 6 different countries, non-identical rockets. Each had been modified differently by different teams, using different available materials and engineering approaches. Some modifications were crude, some were smart. All demonstrated the same basic understanding that a ballistic missile with a modified third stage and an updated guidance package theoretically could reach a Vilari ship in high orbit. Theoretically, 7 of them were correct. Dorat's point defense systems handled the incoming fire. But it cost something. It cost time. It distracted the crew. It cost the certainty that the space above the planet was exclusively his. It also cost one ship, an escort cruiser of medium size, unyielding Victory, located in a slightly lower orbit than the rest of the fleet, took a direct hit from a modified rocket before its point defense batteries could restore tracking and respond. The warhead was nuclear. The output was modest by Vilari standards, but a nuclear explosion at close range to a warship is a nuclear explosion at close range to a warship. And unyielding Victory was disabled with a destroyed radar antenna, a breached nose compartment, and 37 dead. One ship damaged, not destroyed, but damaged by a race without orbital weapons. By a race that had taken the problem of orbital weapons, sat with it for about a week, and created a partial solution from technologies they already had in missile silos across the planet. Dorat stood in the center of his bridge and processed this. "Recall the ground forces," he said. His voice was completely level. "All of them, all 3 sites. Execute emergency evacuation immediately." "Commander, ground forces are in contact," Seville began. "I know they are in contact. Execute the evacuation anyway. We will pull them out under fire if we have to, but we will pull them out." He turned to his communications officer. "Open the full fleet channel." The channel opened. "All ships, change orbital altitude to the maximum safe distance from the surface. Point defense systems to full active status. I want missile tracking for every launch site for which we have data, and I want predictive guidance for any object we don't have." He paused. "They modified their Earth-to-Earth rockets for orbital interaction. We don't know how many of them are modified and how many aren't. Treat every launch as a potential orbital threat until proven otherwise." He closed the channel. Seville stood next to him, saying nothing. Seville indicated that he had something to say and was waiting for the right moment. "Speak," Dorat said. "We are on the 9th day," Seville said carefully. "Our initial forecast was 30 days for total submission. We are on the 9th day, and we are recalling our ground forces. I know where we are. The Supreme Commander will ask. I know what the Supreme Commander will ask. I will answer when he asks." Dorat turned back to the tactical display. "Now I need to know what else they will do that is not in the database." What else they would do that was not in the database turned out to be the question that occupied his next 72 hours, during which he did not sleep at all. Even by the relaxed definition he had been using since the 4th day, the evacuation of the ground forces did not go smoothly. At all 3 sites, Vilari landing craft came under constant fire during the withdrawal. The humans had clearly foreseen or planned for the possibility of the ground forces evacuation and had positioned assets there to make it as costly as possible. Anti-aircraft systems that had not been active during the first week of the operation were activated during the evacuation window. 3 landing craft were damaged. 1 was destroyed before leaving the atmosphere, killing the crew and 40 soldiers on board. It was not a withdrawal. Dorat was precise about that in his mind. It was a costly tactical retreat, not a withdrawal. But his soldiers were returning with captured Vilari equipment in human hands, still visible on the cameras as the landing craft lifted off, and the humans on the ground cheered. He heard it faintly over the open channel his crew used to monitor human communications. Millions of voices on 3 different continents, in 3 different languages, all making the same sound. They were cheering because they thought they had won something. Dorat, looking at his casualty reports, thought they were perhaps right. He had a fleet in high orbit, and his ground forces were assembled. He still operated from a position of overwhelming superiority. 200 ships against a planet with no capacity for space combat other than those modified rockets. He could still win. He was continuously calculating, looking for the clean path to victory, which he knew must exist. The path was becoming increasingly complex. The modified rockets were part of it. In the 10 days since the start of the invasion, humans had not just built the modified rockets they had already launched, they had built more. His sensor scans of the planet's surface showed increased activity at production sites, research facilities, military bases. They were building things, modifying things, working at a pace his analysts described with some difficulty as simply incomprehensible, given the scale of what they were trying to do. "How are they doing it?" he asked Virat during one of the briefings. "Their industrial potential is significant but not outstanding. The engineering tasks involved in modifying a ballistic missile for orbital interaction are substantial, even with existing knowledge of basic principles. The practical implementation, they are sharing data," she said, "across all national borders. They have every engineering team working on the problem, sharing their results with every other engineering team on the planet in real time. They are effectively conducting a planetary research project without the delay of coordination." She paused. "Furthermore, and this is what is hard for me to imagine without it sounding alarming, they have Vilari weapons. Weapons captured from our soldiers on the ground. There are approximately 400 units of Vilari personal and squad weaponry currently in human possession. They have had them for 3 to 9 days, depending on when they were captured." She displayed the relevant data. "Our technology of energy weapons is significantly superior to their own. Theoretically, it should take months for reverse engineering, even for a technically advanced race." She looked at him levelly. "They are broadcasting partial technical analyses of our weapons into open research networks. For the last 4 days, they have shared their initial findings with every research institution on the planet. They are working on reverse engineering our weapons the same way they are working on modifying their rockets. They will achieve nothing in 9 days, Seville said, sounding as if he hoped that was the case. "Probably not, but in 30 days? 60? Virat agreed. She closed her display. "I cannot give you a confident forecast of how long it will take them to produce a functional copy of a Vilari energy weapon. I do not have baseline data for this race. I can only tell you that the speed at which they exchange and synthesize data is faster than anything in our records." Dorat looked at the planet below. He thought of the words of the old merchant Minat. They absorbed them. They took everything those races had, their technology, their tactics, their weapons, and integrated it. He had assumed that was an exaggeration, the hyperbole of a scared race, an old story told to make monsters bigger than they were. He was rethinking that assumption with some urgency. On the 12th day, the humans did something that eliminated any remaining ambiguity regarding the direction of the conflict. They launched humans into his ships. Not missiles, not weapons, but people. 3 refitted orbital transport vehicles, stripped of all excess mass, packed with compressed fuel, and targeted at 3 different Vilari ships on the edge of the fleet formation. The transport vehicles had no weapons. They moved at extreme speed on a direct intercept course. Vilari point defense systems classified them as missiles and targeted them accordingly. 2 were destroyed before reaching their targets. The third was not. It docked forcibly, inaccurately, but functionally to the hull of the escort ship Quiet Authority. The airlock was cut open using methods that the Quiet Authority's crew could not immediately classify. And then human soldiers were inside the Vilari warship. What followed was 6 hours of the most chaotic internal combat Dorat had ever seen in a field report. There were 23 humans. There were 480 crew members on the Quiet Authority. The humans were smaller, had superior personal weaponry, and did not know the layout of the ship. They were suppressed not in 6, but in 22 hours. Along the way, they dismantled the ship's communication array. They didn't destroy it. They documented it. They took pictures and recordings of every system they could reach: propulsion, navigation, weapons, communications, and transmitted the data back to the surface. And then, when their ammunition ran out and their position was completely surrounded, they surrendered with what the commander of the Quiet Authority described in his incident report as an air of complete satisfaction. 23 humans on an enemy warship without knowledge of the layout against 480 crew members, 22 hours. And when it was all over, somewhere on the planet below, 10,000 engineers had new data to work with. Dorat read the Quiet Authority incident report and very carefully placed it on his console. He wrote his message to Rail. This was the most difficult communication he had ever sent in his career because it required him to say something he had not said in 12 campaigns. He wrote it directly, without attempts to soften. because Rail had no patience for softening. "Supreme Commander, I must give you an honest assessment. We are not losing, but we are not winning. The humans are not behaving like a race under conquest. They are behaving like a race undergoing training. Every fight teaches them something they remember and apply to the next fight. They have modified their ballistic missiles for orbital targeting. They are actively reverse engineering our weapons technology on a planetary scale. They have carried out a successful boarding operation on one of our ships and extracted technical data before being contained. The casualty ratio remains in our favor. But the trend is moving against us, and it is moving faster than I can explain." He paused, his fingers over the keyboard. Then he added one more line. "I believe the merchant Minot was right. I believe we need to rethink the strategic basis of this operation." He sent it. Then he looked at the tactical display. 200 ships positioned in high orbit over a planet that should have surrendered 2 weeks ago. Below, a race that had fought for 10,000 years had been at war with an interstellar empire for 12 days. In those 12 days, they had forced the retreat of ground forces, damaged one of his ships with improvised orbital weapons, captured technical data from a second, and were currently producing modified weapons at a speed his forecasts could not comfortably contain. They were learning every day. They were learning. He thought of Minot's words again. To invade them now is to teach them lessons they are not yet supposed to learn. He looked at the orbital mechanics display, at the trajectory calculations, at the fleet positions. He thought about what it would mean to order a full retreat and return to Rail without a conquest, without territory, nothing but a thin dossier and a 12-day operation that cost more than 300 soldiers and 1 damaged ship. He thought about what it would mean to stay. He was still thinking about it when a new alert came in. His sensor officer's voice was controlled, precise, and had in it that quality that experienced officers developed specifically for delivering information that was worse than expected. "Commander, we are detecting an energy weapon discharge from the planet's surface. Multiple objects." Dorat's head rose. "Human energy weapons?" His science officer confirmed after a moment. Her voice carried the same cautious quality. Not identical to Vilari specifications, but the basic discharge profile matches our technology. They have functional prototypes. 12 days. In 12 days, with zero knowledge of Vilari technology, having 23 soldiers' worth of stolen data and partial documentation from the Quiet Authority boarding. 12 days. Dorat stared at his display. 12 days. He took the command channel. "It is time to make a decision." Rail's response arrived on the 14th day. It arrived as a text message, which was unusual. Rail usually used video for command-level messages. The fact that he used text told Dorat something about the content even before he read the first word. It read, "Hold your position, do not retreat. The political costs of retreating from an active conquest operation are currently unacceptable. Continue orbital pressure. Neutralize their weapon development capabilities from orbit if necessary. You are authorized to expand target parameters." Dorat read it. "Read it again." Expanding target parameters meant civilian targets, industrial centers, energy grids, infrastructure that fueled the weapon development effort, which by this point was so tightly woven into the entire population that there was no clean way to hit one without affecting the other. Rail did not say this directly. He didn't need to. The phrasing was precise enough for a career officer to understand without needing it explained. Dorat sat with the message for a very long time. He thought about the 12 campaigns, about the clean mathematics of superior force meeting inferior resistance, about the races that always broke, because the mathematics was real, and the mathematics was always in their favor. He had been proud of those campaigns, not in a showy way, not the way young officers bragged loudly so others would notice, but quietly, the way you are proud of a job well done, efficient, professional, without unnecessary cruelty. He thought about expanding target parameters on a planet with 8 billion people. Then he put Rail's message aside and displayed the tactical display because the decision had actually been made somewhere in the last 14 days, and all that remained was to act on it. Humans began their counterattack on the morning of the 15th day. Not a single action, not a single decisive strike from one direction. A coordinated, simultaneous operation along all axes available to them, synchronized and organized with a precision Dorat could not believe for a race in the 14th day of its first interstellar conflict. It began in orbit. 47 modified ballistic missiles, launched in a precisely timed wave designed specifically to overload the point defense systems of 3 ships simultaneously, not to destroy the ships, but to distract their point defense systems. While the point defense systems were busy, 3 other orbital transport vehicles launched from different points on the surface, untargeted at ships with active point defense, but targeted at ships that were busy dealing with the wave of rockets. 2 transport vehicles reached their targets. The landing parties from them were different from the first group, better equipped, moving with a confidence and tactical discipline the 23 people who crashed into the enemy warship had not possessed. Data from the Quiet Authority boarding had been used. Ship layout, crew procedures, internal security protocols. All of this had been studied and planned for. These teams moved through the ships they boarded with purpose. They were not trying to capture the ships, they were trying to capture the engines. Dorat realized this about 40 minutes after the collision, when one of his engineering officers reported that a boarding team on the Iron Patience had reached the engine room and was actively working on the main propulsion systems. They were not destroying the engines. They were documenting them, recording everything. In the middle of an active boarding with Vilari security forces converging on their position, the human boarding team split up. Half held off the security while the other half worked with extraordinary calmness, transmitting the data in compressed packets to the planet's surface. They spent 17 minutes in the engine room before they were suppressed. 17 minutes was enough for 700 researchers on the surface to begin work on analyzing the propulsion system. That was not the worst part of the 15th day. The worst part came from Earth. Human energy weapons were crude. Dorat reviewed the analysis. They were not copies of the weapons. They were translations of the principle into materials and production processes available to humans. The output was lower, the range significantly shorter, the rate of fire inconsistent. But they worked, and humans had built several thousand units in 12 days, distributed them through a network of production facilities and volunteer groups, and put them in the hands of every military unit on the planet that could use them. For the first time since the start of the invasion, soldiers on the ground had weapons that could damage Vilari armor at practical combat distances. The 3 former landing zones that Dorat's ground forces had evacuated 9 days ago had been retaken by humans during this time, and reinforced not because they expected the Vilari to land there again, but because they expected to use them as launch pads for something else. At the exact same moment the orbital boarding operations began, every anti-aircraft system the humans had was directed upward. Every modified rocket left in the inventory was launched. Every energy weapon that could reach low orbit was fired. It was not a coordinated strike in the Vilari sense. It was not clean, not fully synchronized, not optimally targeted. It was every human military asset on the planet doing something aggressive toward the ships above them, simultaneously a wall of fire rising without an ideal plan behind it, except the plan to force Dorat to divert the fleet's attention to everything at once. And it worked, because Dorat's fleet could not be everywhere at once. The ship Indomitable Measure took 2 nearly simultaneous nuclear missile hits in a focused volley aimed specifically at its lower sensor array. The array was destroyed. The ship was blind below it and had to change position, breaking formation. The gap in the formation lasted 11 seconds. During those 11 seconds, a coordinated swarm of everything the humans could put into the air passed through it. Conventional aircraft, loaded with every bomb in their inventory, targeted the lower part of the ship closest to the gap in the formation. The aircraft did not survive. They never returned to the surface. The ship they hit barely survived. Dorat looked at his damage reports and made a decision. All ships, formation Alpha, 3. We are pulling back to a safe distance. His voice was level. Transmit a signal to Indomitable Measure to hold position until it can regroup, and we will form up around it. Seville looked at him. I know, Dorat said. Transmit a message to the Supreme Commander. Tell him I am executing a tactical repositioning. The repositioning gave them time. It did not change the situation. Over the next 6 days, the humans did not stop. They worked with the driven, exhausted, relentless energy of a race that somewhere in the first week of the invasion had decided that sleep was something they would do later. Data from the Iron Patience engine room led to the first functional prototype of a propulsion system based on Vilari principles, built by humans from human materials. Within 4 days, it was inefficient and had a power consumption problem its builders had not fully solved, but it worked. They installed it on a test transport vehicle and launched it into orbit, where it functioned for 6 hours before the power system failed. 6 hours on the 20th day. Rail arrived. He came on his flagship, Hand of Dominion, with 15 additional warships, and his message to Dorat was brief and direct. I am taking personal command of this operation. Present a full report on the situation. Dorat presented his full report on the situation. He presented it without references, without framing, without any attempts to make the numbers look better than they were. 394 Vilari soldiers dead. 2 ships significantly damaged. 1 ship boarded twice. A ground operation that was completely withdrawn. A race that went from 0 orbital capability to a functional, though crude, prototype FTL engine in 20 days. The planet was now armed with several thousand energy weapons. Rail read the entire report without saying a word. Then he said, "Show me the weapon development forecasts." Dorat showed him the weapon development forecasts. They were not comforting. Rail looked at them for a long time. He was old, older than 400 years, with 41 conquered worlds and a career built on the precise application of overwhelming force. He had waged wars that lasted for decades and had fought races that resisted much longer than humans. He was not easily touched. But Dorat, who had served under him for 30 years, recognized what was on his face now. It was not fear, it was something colder and more analytical than fear. It was the expression of a commander looking at a projected graph and performing calculations that did not end well. "If we expand target parameters," Rail said, "if we strike at the civilian infrastructure fueling this weapon development research networks, the production base, we will slow it down," Dorat said. "We will not stop it. They have distributed the work across thousands of sites on 6 continents. There is no central node to destroy. To meaningfully undermine the effort, we would have to strike cities, hundreds of cities. And they now have several thousand energy weapons on Earth that can attack our ships at the altitude required for precision strikes. We will take losses." "Yes. How many?" Dorat looked at his forecasts. "I don't know. That is the honest answer. I do not have a confident forecast for this race at this moment. Too many variables." He paused. "What I can tell you is that at the current rate of development, they will have functional orbital energy weapons within 40 days. Within 90 days, they will have something close to propulsion technology. Within 6 months, I cannot rule out that they will be able to follow us." Rail was silent for a very long time. On the display between them, the blue planet rotated in the darkness. Below its clouds, something was being built. Something that did not exist 20 days ago. "The merchant Minot was right," Rail finally said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir, we taught them." "Yes." Rail stood. He walked to the viewport, and he stood there the way old people stand when they make a decision they know they cannot undo. "Order a full retreat," he said. "All ships. We are leaving this system." "Sir, we are leaving?" His voice was level, final. "And we will tell no one what happened here. This operation will not be recorded in the registry of conquests. It will not become doctrine. It will not be studied." He turned. "Do you understand me?" "I understand you." Dorat orders. The Vilari fleet left the solar system on the 22nd day. They did not announce their departure. They simply left. 200 ships, plus Rail's 15 ships, exiting high orbit and accelerating toward the jump point at the edge of the system. By the time human tracking systems confirmed that the movement was a retreat and not a redeployment, the fleet was already beyond the outer planets. On the planet below, it took about 4 hours for the confirmation to spread, then about 4 minutes for the sound to begin. There were many different languages, many different words for the same thing. The main sound was the same in all of them. 3 days after the departure, a signal was broadcast from Earth, not on the radio frequencies humans used for their own communications, but on the frequency the Vilari fleet had used for its conquest broadcast 3 weeks ago, the one that read, "Your world has been selected. Surrender." Within 12 hours, the signal first reached the ship of the merchant Minot. Minot listened to it, and the old trader who had made the desperate call to Dorat sat very quietly for a very long time after it ended. Then they passed it on, because such a signal deserved to be heard. It reached 6 more species before the Vilari received it. All 6 went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when someone says something that changes how everyone understands the situation. The signal read, "We know what those marker beacons were for. We found them many years ago. We know who placed them and why. We know that other species have been watching us, deciding whether to make contact or wait. We know that some of you were afraid of what we might become. You were not wrong to be afraid, but you were afraid of the wrong thing. We are not a threat to any race that leaves us alone. We are not interested in conquest. We are not seeking war with anyone who does not seek war with us. Our history of wars with each other is just that, what we learned over 10,000 years. Not how to destroy, but how to refuse to be destroyed. Empire of Vilari. You came here to teach us our place in the galaxy. You taught us something, but it was not what you intended. We have your weapons. We have your engine designs. We have the beginning of your navigation technology. We did not ask for any of this. You brought it here. To everyone else listening, we are humans. We live on the third planet of this system. We no longer ask to be left alone. We are ready to be a part of what the galaxy is. But the first lesson for anyone who needs it: we do not surrender. Supreme Commander Rael received the signal aboard the Hand of Dominion 3 days into the journey from the human solar system. He listened to it in his private quarters, alone. Playing the recording twice to be sure he understood it correctly, he then sat for a long time. He thought of the 41 worlds in the registry, of the clean, efficient operations, of the races that broke because the mathematics was real and the mathematics was always in their favor. He thought of the marker beacons placed 3,000 years ago by a race that looked at Earth and understood what the Vilari didn't think to ask. He thought of the 3 words received on the first day, broadcast from all transmitters on the planet simultaneously in all languages: come and try. He had thought it was bravado. He now understood it was simply a precise description of the situation. Come, try, and see what happens. 41 worlds. No losses, no surprises in any campaign that required a rethinking of the model. The 42nd was different. He played the recording again. He listened to it in its entirety. Then he composed a message for the entire High Command, not just for the Military Council, but for the entire governing body, each member marked as urgent. It read, "I need to brief the full council on the operation on Earth. There are things we need to understand about this race before any further contact is made. What we encounter does not fit our doctrine, our history, or our models. It must be done." He sent it. He closed his displays. He sat in the darkness of his quarters, and the stars moved beyond the small viewport. Somewhere behind him, becoming smaller with every hour, the third planet of the quiet solar system glowed from within. Cities in the darkness. Billions of people who in just 22 days invented orbital weapons, boarded enemy warships, and reverse-engineered faster-than-light drive technology from scavenged data, and who were now, probably, already arguing about what to do next. This was the thing that was not in the file. Not the fighting itself, not the refusal to surrender, not the tactical creativity or the speed of adaptation, or the terrifying capacity for coalitions that formed in hours from centuries-old enemies. It was this. When it was over, they would not stop. They never stopped. They would take everything they learned from 22 days of war and would build on it, and would argue about it, and would refine it, and then they would emerge into the galaxy, not for conquest, not because they were cruel, but because they were exactly what the marker beacons warned about: a race still growing, still becoming, and now awakened, and looking up, and knowing that the galaxy existed. Rael sat in the darkness for a long time. The stars did not answer him. They never answered.